In the 5th chapter, in verse 27, we'll be reading to verse 39 tonight. So I was reading in a comment section on the internet, which is generally a bad place to be. I'll be first to admit that. In a comment section on the internet this week, someone said, if you just strip religions of all their mythological rubbish, you can get down to the core and the philosophical something that's behind them. Now again, the comment section of the internet is nowhere to go to get wisdom. But I want to ask the question, it started me thinking, can we, in a sense, get behind Christianity, strip it away of all its things that don't agree with us, and get to the philosophical, psychological benefit of it and still have it intact? Could we do that? Now, I have to be 100% honest with you. You can obviously draw psychological and philosophical benefit from any religion in the world. They give answers to the gaps that we can't figure out. I mean, that's the job of religion. Just being honest, However, and this is going to be the point of tonight, Christianity has never actually been about its philosophy or its teachings. It's never actually centered around that. And we always try to do it. We always try and dig into that. And throughout society, we've constantly tried to move Christianity away from what it's actually about to something that will benefit mankind. And I put this in big inverted commas. And every single time that we've done that, it instantly loses its power. Because Christianity is not about its teachings or its philosophy or its benefit. It's always been about its founder, Jesus. Without Jesus and him being who he says he is, the whole of Christianity collapses in on itself. Now I point to this because that's what we're going to be dealing with tonight in the call of Matthew, in this passage that we're looking at in Luke chapter 5, verse 27 to 39. You will notice that there are two groups in this passage. In this entire engagement that we're going to look through, there's two people. Those who are looking for teachings and rules, and those who just want to follow Jesus. And so tonight's going to be a massive check for us. It's going to be probably the most practical sermon you've ever heard me preach, because it's going to be like a checklist. Like a do this, don't do this. I don't preach like that normally. I'm more up in the head, ethereal, and I apologize about that, but that's just who I am. Tonight we're going to be practical. We're going to look at, are you following Jesus, or are you looking for teachings and rules? So let's read together. Luke chapter 5, verse 27 to 39. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting in his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi had a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." They said to him, "John's disciples often pray and fast, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make a friend of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from him. In those days they will fast." He told them a parable. "No one tears a piece of new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they would have torn the new garment, and the patch for the new one will not match the old. No one pours new wines into the old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wines would burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants new, for they say the old is better." May the Lord bless the reading of his word tonight. Now, to be honest with you, we could go a number of paths in breaking down and analyzing this passage. And in fact, you'll often see in a lot of sermon series, they will then neatly break this up into a number of short sub-sermons. we'll deal with Matthew's call. And that is a great lesson by itself, just looking at the call of Matthew or Levi. Then they would look at the Pharisees' interaction with the disciples, and there's a whole sermon on that. And then there's a whole sermon on the new wines and the new old wineskins. The problem is, and we generally do that because there's been headings added into the text that were never there. You know those little subheadings that you have in the text? Those are extra biblical. Someone else added to that. That's not part of the original text. Luke writes this as a whole, as an argument. He's trying to communicate something to us. And if we break it up and analyze it in each little section, we miss what Luke is trying to teach us. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at it a whole because we need to see what Luke is talking about. And to put it simply, to kind of get you on the same page, what Luke is telling us is Jesus offers himself and his gospel. But we are tempted, or we often substitute rules and programs. Tertullian, the famous church father, was said to have said, I still can't find it, but so we'll say it's anachronistic. They said, by the nature of what the gospel is, our hearts struggle to hold on to it. We don't want the gospel. We want rules. We want simple teaching that we can say yes or no. We want simple black and white. And the gospel offers us Jesus. So, like Luke, we're going to push ourselves to realize that it's Jesus or nothing. Either we come to God through him and his righteousness, or we don't come to God at all. There's no middle ground. And I want to show you tonight as we struggle with this. We desperately struggle with this. We are constantly falling back into a religion of self-reliance, rules and teachings. And so we'll be engaging in a simple exercise this evening. Checks to see if we are in religion, if we are in self-reliant religion, or if we are actually following Jesus. So the first test that we'll see is Jesus our physician or is he our example? This is our first thing, the healthy and the sick. My first point, the healthy and the sick. Notice the first interaction. The first interaction is Jesus and the Pharisees and Levi over company, over who's in and who's out. And notice, Matthew and the Pharisees are the interacting characters. Matthew drops everything. He sets down his tax booth, he just follows Jesus, and in following Jesus, he's like, guys, everyone I know. And guess who Matthew knows? Tax collectors, sinners. He was shunned from society. He goes, guys, I'm following this guy, he's amazing. The Pharisees rock up, and they look around, and they are highly suspicious of this group of people. Now, Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor of ethical leadership at the New York University Stern School of Business. Now, that's a good title. He wrote a very famous book in 2012 called The Righteous Mind. It's very evolutionary based, it's not Christian at all. But the whole argument of the book is that human beings by nature are in-group, out-group thinkers. We want to know what makes the in-group and what makes everyone else the out-group so that we can identify neatly and clearly what is in and what is out, who are right and who are wrong, who is good and who is bad. Now, what's interesting in this book is that how people treat others who they find their moral inferiors. And everyone in the world has someone who they treat as a moral inferior. You will see this with the Pharisees. The Pharisees come up and they look at the sinners and they're like, who are these people? What's that emotion? Jonathan Haidt identifies that emotion as disgust. People are disgusted by people they think are morally inferior to them. It's an easy in-group, out-group. And it's literally in the brain, the same wiring is lit up with when you see a food that makes you gag and someone who is morally, in your minds, inferior to you. Is disgust. This is how the Pharisees see this. This is how the interaction goes. Yet Jesus, who is everyone's moral superior, hangs out with who? The sinners. The lowest of the low. Why? Why? Because this is his gospel. This is what he's come to offer, to heal the sick. And so the irony is that which disgusts the Pharisees, what makes them look down on others because, they're simply better, is actually what identifies them as part of that group of sinners. I mean, notice the arbitrary thing that the Pharisees put themselves into the in-group and everyone else into the out-group. It's the ability that they have to follow rules. So everyone who doesn't follow rules is disgusting. Now, we do the same thing today. Don't judge the Pharisees. Depending on where you stand on the political aisle, everyone on the other side is a bunch of idiots, Hitler, stupid degenerates, right? So if you're more liberal, then anyone who judges is the absolute worst. You look down on them in disgust. But what is your line? The thing that you do easily. That's where you base your morality. That's where you base your in-group, out-group. And the irony is you don't see yourself as the one who in fact needs what? Healing. Who needs help. Do you see the mark of self-reliance there? The mark of wanting to know the rules so I can put lines in so I can be self-reliant. But Jesus puts himself with the mess of humanity, with the worst. Why? Because that's who he came to save. So, where do you see yourself tonight? Do you see yourself with the mess? Or have you pulled yourself up out of the diseased world and stand in judgment of it? We don't like this kind of sermon because every single one of us are guilty of it. But the gospel shatters any semblance of being better than our fellow men. Because the gospel, if it is true, then I am the chief of sinners that Jesus came to save. We like to say that in Christian circles, right? This is a true and trustworthy statement that Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of which I am chief. Right? We love, in the Christian circles. But then someone swears in our midst. Yeah. Right? Church, have you identified yourself with the evils of this world? With what's wrong with the world? Because that is who Jesus came to save. In a sense, there's a Pharisee in all of us. And we don't like this. Because we like to build a world of categories of righteousness that are easy for us to do, in groups, out groups, markers that we can know and trust. Not realizing that the little sins that we allow in our little in-group, that we justify, make us just as guilty as everyone else. And so we are, whether we like it or not, with the world. We're not better than them. We're just like them. And so the first marker I want to make you realize tonight is, are you reliant on your markers? Are you self-reliant on the rules or the gospel? Are you trusting in your ability or are you trusting in Jesus? Do you see yourself as a sinner in need of a Savior? Or do you see yourself as, okay, this may be a little example. That's the first marker. The next marker is, what do we celebrate? And we see this in our second point, which is feasting and fasting, or fasting and feasting. This comes in the second engagement with the Pharisees, where the Pharisees engage with Jesus, and they're like, Jesus, your guys eat all the time. We fast. Do you see that self-reliance? We fast. Everyone else fasts. Look at you guys. And now what's interesting about this passage, especially if we tackle it alone, it becomes a passage about whether or not Christians should fast, which totally misses the point of the passage. It's not a passage actually about whether or not we should fast. It's a passage on about what we are celebrating. And so this becomes the marker, a second marker of our self-reliance. Are we self-reliant? Are we celebrating ourselves? Or are we celebrating Jesus? This is the second test. Are we celebrating Jesus or our effort? Notice what Jesus says. He's like, the bridal party doesn't fast when they're in the company of the bridegroom. In other words, when people are around me, they don't want to fast. We're having a party. They're celebrating me. He's the bridegroom. It's not about fasting or not fasting. It's about celebrating Jesus. I mean, that's the absolute absurdity of that statement. The Pharisees thought that through their actions, through their fasting, God would be pleased with them. Jesus absolutely destroys that. In fact, I'm just going to put this out there. He makes a very uncomfortable religion. Because right now, if you're getting this, if you're thinking about this properly, it instantly means that nothing you do actually matters anymore. And we hate that. Because what's the inevitable question that pops into our mind? Well, then what must I do? Right? But Jesus smashes this idea of saying, if I just fast, then God will look at me. But it's not about fasting. In fact, if we think it's about fasting, we've continually made it about me. In a sense, the question comes up, should Christians fast? Of course they should fast. It's good for the soul, it's good for your body. It disciplines our stubborn bodies to rely on God. But, and this is a huge but, if we are fasting to get God on our side, we shouldn't fast. If we are fasting to prove to God how much He should look at us, we shouldn't fast. Because guess what? We're not doing it to celebrate God. We're doing it for ourselves. You get this engagement all the time. You know, should I fast? Shouldn't I fast? I had a big argument with one guy. He used to be part of a church. Love him. I mean, he's such a great guy. I won't tell you his name. And he came to me. He's like, because we had a whole sermon about fasting. And I'm like, as soon as you make fasting about getting God on your side, you've lost it. And he's like, no, but we need to come together and fast because then God will draw near to us. And I'm like, right there, you've made your fasting about who? You. You're bending God. You're manipulating Him. You're entering into negotiations, right? You're trying to get God on your side. And what have you done? You've slipped right back into self-righteousness. Look at how good I am, God. Look what I can offer you. Look at all my self-denial. Who's the center of your engagement in that reality? You. It's not God. Yet if you realize that fasting clarifies your thoughts and your body to depend more on God, and that's why you're doing it, then fast. Fasting's good for you. It really is. Kind of regulates your whole leptin, ghrelin kind of markers in your body if you want to really do it for health reasons. Just do it for that. But if you're trying to fast to get God into your side, rather eat a cake. It'll be better for you. Because you'll feel guilty and go pray to Jesus. Do you see how we mess this up? We constantly make this about us. But fasting should deepen our dependence on Jesus. It shows our body, it reminds our body that our true need is Him. Man does not live on bread alone, but by the word that comes from God. Do you see the difference? Now, church, I want to say that applies to every single church discipline. It can be Bible reading. It can be prayer. It can be literally anything. It can be coming to church. These are good things. Why? Because they benefit you. They remind you. They teach you. They put you in place where God speaks to you. But if you think God is happy because you've done that, eat cake. This is the second test. What are we celebrating? What are we celebrating? What are you celebrating in your life? Who you are, what you're becoming, what you're doing? Or are you celebrating Jesus? Go back to the start of this passage. Who was throwing the party? Matthew, Levi. Why was he throwing the party? Because he decided to follow Jesus, and this was the greatest thing ever. For those of you who were here part of this morning's service, everyone's an evangelist. Dr. Des reminded us. Everyone's an evangelist. Some people are evangelizing about their cell phone, about their car, about the deals they get at Checkers. Matthew was just bubbling. Come have a party. I've met this guy, Jesus, and he's the Savior of the world. Let me introduce him to you. See the celebration? That's the second point. Third thing is, are we dredging up old ways? Which is the third point tonight, which is new wine. This is the final test. Are we longing for the old wine? Have we thrown ourselves fully into what Jesus Christ offers us? Or are we dragging up the old way of being into Christ's reality? This is this last weird illustration that Jesus gives us. And it's weird because we can go to the local supermarket and pick up grape juice, and what happens to it? It goes off, right? I don't know if you've seen that. You buy grape juice. We don't drink a lot of juice in our house, so every time we have fruit juice in our house, it goes off, which is weird. Because you know that grape juice shouldn't go off. You actually have a dentist by the name of Thomas Welsh to blame for off grape juice and apple juice and orange juice. He invented this in the 1800s. He discovered that if you pasteurize grape juice, you kill off all the natural yeast that is always in every single fruit. You cannot squeeze fruit without yeast getting into it. And so if you boil it a little bit, just reach it up to a certain temperature, you kill all that yeast, and it never becomes wine. It rots and becomes rotten grape juice. 1849 was the last time, 1849 was the first time that you could actually buy grape juice. Before this time, every single time you bought grape juice, you were buying wine in the process of being wine. Legitimately. That was what was happening to it. It was a natural reality. As you squashed that thing, it was well on its way to becoming fermented, becoming wine. Now what happens when you make wine? Alcohol and CO2. And so it expands. Anyone who's made ginger beer will see this, where you put it into the bottle and it explodes. This is why you don't put new wine into old wineskins, because the CO2 would cause it to stretch and explode. The CO2 makes this. Okay, now enough of a brewing lesson. I think you guys don't need any brewing lessons. What does Jesus mean by this? Well, obvious to everyone in the time. Old wine, fermented wine, fully fermented wine, was always better because it was fermented. The process had done. The yeast had settled. It wasn't all husky and gross and fermenty. If you've ever drunk anything that's on its way to being fermented, you realize that when people taste new wine, they long for old wine. It's disgusting. And the taste is not the point. Again, this is not a brewing lesson this evening. What Jesus is showing us, what he's teaching us, what we miss in the 21st century, is everyone longs for old wine. We have to think like, oh, grape juice, that's nice. Man, before 1849, grape juice wasn't a thing. Realize that. You had new wine, which was fermenty and bubbly and gross. And you had old wine, which was settled and mature and tasted nice. Guess what? Everyone likes old wine. Now, to move away from wine to what Jesus is teaching, every single one of us long for or even prefer self-reliance to the new wine of the gospel. We love it. We love the old stuff. Going back to Tertullian's statement, by the nature of what the gospel is, our hearts struggle to hold on to it. You will find in your life you are constantly going back to self-reliant religion. I am constantly going back to self-reliant religion. And that's why Luke has put these stories together. They sit as a check mark of our hearts. Where are we orientated, church? Are we gospel-reliant? Or are we longing for old wine? Are we self-reliant? These are checks that we've gone through tonight. And I want to ask you tonight, where do you find yourself? First check. Do you find yourself among the sick, in need of a physician, or among the healthy, who's pretty okay? Watch yourself. You're longing for old wine. Do you find yourself celebrating your efforts and what you're doing and what you're making of yourself in the world? Or are you just celebrating Jesus? Watch yourself, church. You might be well on your way to longing and enjoying again old wine. Jesus needs to be our focus, our hope, our everything. So again, I said this is going to be a practical sermon. It's not very ethereal. Shock horror. But where are you? Where are you? In prepping this, I won't lie, this week, I checked my heart. I was going back. I was longing for old wine. Stepping away from Jesus. I take you to the beginning of this sermon. Jesus doesn't give us that option. He won't share us with our reliance and himself. It's him or nothing. It's his righteousness or nothing. Where are you tonight? I think I'm going to give us time. I don't normally do this. I'm not that kind of preacher. I'm going to give us time to just check our hearts. So we're going to close. I'm not going to close in prayer. I want you to ask your own heart, where am I tonight? And then after that, now I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. Once we've checked our hearts, we'll sing and worship. So let's close our eyes. Let's check ourselves.